Now, immediately after that, Dale, came the 3M,
Okay.
the origins of 3M. And if you remember, what was the name of the man who...
Duxbury.
Roy Duxbury. But this actually goes back, before that, to a man called John Miser.
Who was the president of 3M at the time.
And he wanted to create... You tell us.
He had an inkling. He had been to a meeting in the Canadian Embassy in Washington. And they had met a lot of people there. He talked to all of them, and they were all high profile, very powerful, influential people. And he asked them to explain quite how it is that they were there. How did they get that sort of influence? What do they think had an impact on them? And all of them mentioned a university teacher who had changed their life in some way. So he reckoned that these people were very influential, and they must be highly regarded and acknowledged in their community. And he checked into it, and it turned out that wasn't true. So as a company, since he was the president of 3M Canada, he sort of challenged us and the university community to recognize these people more, and proposed, I think they went to Western and to the medical school.
Yeah.
And said, let's recognize people in medicine.
Bruce Squires was the person who is buried now in the annals of history, and I don't know what happened to Bruce, but Bruce organized the very first of those conferences. He used to be the educational developer for the medical faculty at Western, and they put on a conference on teaching in the medical sciences. But the thing I like about Miser, the thing I always remember about Miser, you remember his famous expression? He was asked what he wanted to do with this, and he said he wanted something like the Stanley Cup of university teaching. That was the
3 stars after the game.
Yeah. Well, the next I got into that act because even before you, because the 3M company, actually not Miser, but his a personal assistant, a man called Roy Duxbury, who was a sort of a guru and had a lot of university connections and was a sort of an odd job person within 3M who did a lot of things at the behest of Miser, the president. Duxbury...
He was retired, I think.
I think he had retired from an executive position. Yeah. He came to the University of Waterloo to persuade us to do the second of these conferences. And they had in mind a discipline-based conference, perhaps a different discipline now, say engineering. And I remember going to the president's office. The president of Waterloo was Doug Wright, quite a well-known person at the time, and being asked by Doug Wright, would I collaborate with Roy Duxbury to do this? And I said, well, after listening, I said, I can't really see that this is going to do much for my office. It's a lot of work, and it'll be very enjoyable for all these people in engineering, but what would we benefit? And I think they were rather shocked by this, but I said, who would be interested in that? I said, are you not aware of this well-established society, the Society for Teaching and Learning in Higher Education? We've had our 4.
It's national.
Absolutely. We've had 4 conferences. We go right across the country. And they said, oh, how interesting. And that's when you got into the act, because you and Alan Blizzard...
and Mayfay
Elric from the University of Guelph came up with a series of proposals. Tell us about that.
We had the notion of a retreat, and that it would be for a group of Canadian faculty members who would be selected based on their teaching ability, but that they would go away for 2 or 3 days. And the assumption was that if they were good individually, they would be amazing as a group. And I think, too, at that time, the context was that people who were excelling in teaching were very much isolated. So part of the theory or part of the deal was to bring them together so they weren't quite so isolated. They were isolated on their own campuses. So we proposed bringing them together and to having a kind of facilitator that would help them become a good group, powerful group in the country. And that was the original thing. And I think they were a little tentative. I don't think they were I'm not sure Duxbury and Miser quite got it at that point, but they were willing to run with it. They also weren't so sure about the society.
Right.
I can remember them going, and you have a bank account? You don't have a bank account? You don't? Do you have a charter? Do you have anything?
Well, my two things. Certainly, I remember you being a little not claiming enough credit, I think, for the original idea. There were two steps in this. One was they asked for a range of proposals, and I remember you and Alan Blizzard not just submitting the proposal that turned into what we did, but various other types of things. I can't remember what those were, and they may be in the McMaster archives somewhere. But the one that 3M most liked, perhaps because it was closest to Miser's idea of the Stanley Cup of hockey, was the notion of a retreat linked to honouring a number of individuals. And it was, I remember being myself impressed with how well the thing was written up, and it looked very businesslike. But as you say, then the problem was that 3M started to ask, well, who is this group? Who are these people? And I remember the Western Conference had gone, but the next conference was coming up, and it was the first time we ever had it at the University of Ottawa. And Duxbury said, fine, he said, this is a good proposal. I'm going to come to the conference with some senior executives from the 3M company. And I remember you and I looking at each other and saying, well, that's the end of that idea, because they will realize what a very embryonic organization, an informal organization we came. And I still recall meeting them at the beginning of the conference outside the University of Ottawa residence. And because everybody was dressed like you and I are now.
Or shorts and T-shirts
shorts,
and
it was
jeans.
very hot. And these three individuals were dressed in dark suits and ties. And I thought, this is not going to work. Yeah. And I would see them at the conference, who were very conscientious in attending. And I would keep seeing them squatting on the floor, taking part in encounter groups and playing games and doing various things. And my heart sank the more this went on. And we almost, I think, didn't go to the meeting at the end where they were going to tell us
that it wasn't going to fly.
And we went to the meeting, and they said, well, they said, this is really very, very different. You brushed the cobwebs away from the ivory tower of universities. They somehow thought that this was a wonderfully progressive idea, and so that was wonderful. And now, originally, for 1 year we ran that 3M program at Waterloo.
That's right.
And then
first year
it passed on to you at McMaster, and you ran it for how many years afterwards?
14 or 15, something like that.
Yes. Until comparatively recently.
Yeah, and the thing that really clinched it, that I remember the first year it was still iffy, partly because they had done something already in medicine, and that was okay, but it was a bit iffy, and they moved off of that. So I thought we were very much on trial. And Miser actually came to the retreat at Montebello with an entourage, and Duxbury, and there was a group of them. But he met all of the fellows, and I think he was stunned at who they were, and really impressed. So I think that clinched it. I think the fellows themselves clinched it in their mind that, yes, these were the 3 stars of the National Hockey League, These were definitely the very best teachers in the country.
And I suppose we really did have, in a way, since nobody had ever done this before, you were actually honouring for the first time university
nationally,
teachers.
Yeah.
We had the Okufa Awards, and by the way, they were presented at a very early conference. One time, I only remember that from refreshing myself with the minutes. But this was really the first time we'd ever had a national award. That very first year, there were 80-odd applications. I mean, there was a huge number of submissions. Yeah. So clearly we had touched a nerve, and it was clear that those people were very impressive individuals. And also they did things sometimes, went back and did other things.
Afterwards.
At their own
Confirmed
university.
it all. Yeah,
so
that's right.
that was a real success story.